Is this thing on? Okay, cool. So, hi. Welcome to Telecreations. In this video, we're going to be doing a calm and relaxed talk about the Rec films. It's probably hard to see. It's very dark. The power went out, and it doesn't really help the atmosphere given I've just watched the first two of these movies, Rec and Rec 2, aka I guess Rec Squared. For the record, they do actually probably read out more as record, because that's what the whole Rec symbol means. So I guess we'll get right into it. There's only 4 films in this franchise to discuss. I'll be very heavily discussing the first film. I haven't seen the third and fourth one yet. I've only just finished the second one, but I figure it kind of matters more in my case to talk more about the first two before I talk about the second two, given how the first two are back-to-back films. So what can I say about the first film? Like I do with most of my reviews, especially for this show, this calm and relaxed talk where I talk about horror or action franchise. Kind of a joke on the whole calm and relaxed aspect. I've done videos talking about like the Halloween films and Nightmare on Elm Street and Chucky and the Alien franchise, Fast and Furious, shit like that. But of course right now I'm talking about Rec, which is a 4-part horror franchise. It's a Spanish quadrilogy. Oh, it's not a good angle for my back, but it's the best I can do. So Rec is a 2007 film. It is directed by... I'm going to butcher their names, I apologize. You know what? I'm not even going to bother. This is a 78-minute long film released in 2007. It's most notably famous for being probably one of the best found footage films. Obviously in the vein of the Blair Witch Project, which is arguably the best of these films. However, this film uses the technique so beautifully, it could be argued to be the best, if not the second best. I wouldn't argue it to be the best zombie film, but I would say it's a very good one, top tier for sure. So as I go, I guess I'll give you my review straight out for the film. I gave this film 4.5 stars out of 5. My quote, because I always quote the films on Letterboxd. I couldn't for the second one, but that's just my own problem. My quote is, "We have to tape everything, Pablo, for fuck's sake." Simple as it goes. I wrote for my review, "This is a nice, simple documentary about an old woman in an apartment who may or may not want to feast on human flesh." Did I mention that this film was terrifying? Yeah, it's terrifying. That's all I wrote down for my review of it, because, of course, that was my review for Letterboxd. In terms of plot aspects of what happens, pretty much 2 people from a local news team that obviously don't shoot the best stuff. It's more or less just, they're obviously not a TV anchor and cameraman, are they? So she's a news reporter. I believe her name is Jennifer. Her name isn't too notable because they don't really say it a lot, but pretty much the premise is a television reporter and a cameraman follow emergency workers, in this case firefighters, into a dark apartment building and are quickly locked inside with something terrifying. Oh no, it's not Jennifer. Manuela Velasco plays Angela Vidal, and then is it Pablo? Yeah, Pablo Rosso, who's the cameraman, plays Pablo. In the second film, he plays Rosso, and he's also the cameraman in that one. No joke. Yeah, so they're filming, they're just expecting to be like, what happens at night for firefighters, and it's just expecting to be either we're going to see some real action, get a burning building, but then they just get called because they hear, someone's called up saying, hey, look, there's screaming upstairs, we want to know what's going on, we want to, get some emergency department in, and so they do, and it just also happens to be on the night that a much bigger force finds out that there may be an infection in the building and they have to lock it off. The film, for its short runtime, nicely paces out the story. You get to know your leads, your cameraman and your news anchor, and you care for them. When you get to the building, you find out who the people are there. You get to know some of the firefighters that you're following. You get to meet all the people that are there in the building, pretty much. You get to understand who they are, especially in the situation, because they're all in lockdown and whatever and shit. As it all starts to get worse and worse and worse, until they discover the infected woman who ends up biting one of the guys. You can obviously expect where this is going to go. And yeah, it pretty much goes to shit from there, you know. More people start getting infected. The infected start, you know, break out into the building more, and it just evolves from there. I'm not going to go more into details of plot, especially because it's nice, it's tense, it's a slow-paced film, kind of to begin with, but even that slow pace isn't really even slow. It's more or less nothing really happens for the first half of the film, and by nothing, it's not even the first half. The first third, again, sets up the character, sets up the scenario. And then they start getting into more of the horror. So the horror becomes not just... It's focused more on the outside and the fact that, oh, hey, we're being locked in. Why are we being locked in? And then realizing why they're being locked in and what they have to deal with. And, yeah, I think it's a really interesting film. It's an interesting take on the zombies genre, more or less. And it is very scary. It has some great camera work and good acting. Good characters. It's very well directed, got a good, you know, practical effects and good sound design, especially the sound design. I very much appreciate the sound design. I actually use the DTS full cinema quality sound design, so it was very there in your face, and it was very nice, very well done. I even watched some of the behind the scenes for how they made it, and it was very interesting. I guess minor spoilers, because I don't think... I kind of have to, more or less, talk about what happens in the final scene. And this is pretty much where I say, look, spoilers for the next film as well, so maybe skip to the third film, my review for that, potentially, but at the same time, this is pretty much going to give you spoilers for the rest of the franchise. To be fair, it really only counts for the first film, because the second film onwards, at least my current viewing, the second film wasn't so great, and I can only assume the third and fourth aren't going to be as great either, because they haven't been so well received. So yeah, I guess a spoiler warning from now on, but I will say, definitely, if you can, watch REC. It is incredible. Its sequels are up for debate still. At least the second one isn't, but the third and fourth one are still up for debate until I get to watching them later by the end of this video. So let's talk about the spoilers. So after pretty much everyone gets killed and we finally get to the penthouse, and we find out that this zombie plague actually started in this place, and it was more of a religious thing, that someone was possessed by a demon, and they brought that girl to this penthouse where they would study her and try to make a cure of the virus from her blood. And of course, that didn't go down well. We don't know what happened to the guy who lived there. He apparently had been missing for ages, but to some degree, some part of, you know, this girl who was possessed, she does show up, and she's very long and tall and very creepy. A very good monster movie. Very good movie monster. Who then, you know, hunts after our main two characters in the dark, because at this stage the light of the actual camera is broken, and so they use their night vision. And Pablo ends up trying to get Angela out. And of course he gets attacked, and then she tries to find the camera, and by the time she finally does, she gets dragged away, and that's your iconic final shot. But of course they kind of establish more of the backstory, the fact that, you know, the guy brought the girl to the penthouse, locked her up, and studied her for years, and somehow only of recent part of her, to some degree, I don't exactly know how, they never explain it, part of her DNA to some degree, the saliva, whatever the fuck it was, actually went and got into the system of at least the dog who lives in one of the apartments, who they mentioned went to the vet, and then the dog fell into a coma because it was sick, and then when it woke up, it got really rabid, started attacking all the other dogs, and they all kind of got this infection, and it started to attack, and so they realized what was going on. They called, the whatever CDC kind of people. I think they're called GEO in this film, and they investigated, found, the chip that the dog had, linked it back to the apartment, and hence why they locked it down that exact night, which was probably the best time to do it because that's when the virus really went crazy. To some degree, the old woman was infected, the child was infected, but it took her a lot longer. Like, she'd apparently had tonsillitis for 2 days, and the dog was infected. The dog was obviously infected before, and because obviously the dog would have licked the child a lot, because kids like to play with dogs. The girl ends up becoming infected, and somehow the older lady gets infected. It's hard to say. She only went down to collect groceries, so potentially there was something in the actual system of the building itself, whether it be in the water system or whatever. Apparently there was an older man in the Chinese family that was sick, but they didn't know if he was infected, and they never explain or go into it. You never even see him in the second film either, so you don't know if he's infected. I guess to some degree it doesn't matter. So it's still ambiguous enough as to how they all got infected, but you get the idea of it came from this girl who may or may not be possessed by a demon. She definitely looks pretty fucked up. So then, of course, you get to the sequel, Rec 2. Rec 2 is an interesting sequel. It is a 2009 film, directed by, I believe, the same guys. I gave the film 3 stars, and this is what I said for it. I can't say that I was expecting good things from a sequel to such a tense and well-crafted horror film, nor did I expect a complete disaster. Instead, Rec 2 was something else. It wasn't disappointing, just lacking. The film's strong points are its explanation of the origins of the virus and the biblical themes, which can be argued as a dumb thing, but it's a kind of nicely different take on the zombie genre and doesn't really contradict its predecessor. The weak points, however, is its overdone camera work. Still first person, but it doesn't feel as cheap and messy as the previous film, despite the first film's good, use of cinematography. Instead, all its glitches and technical stuff feels professional, manipulated, especially because the 4 SWAT guys actually have their own cameras attached to, their helmet or their shoulder or something, so just, you know exactly when you're going to see their parts, and that part's always going to usually equal into a jump scare. It becomes predictable. But, the professional camera they use, it has all these glitches, which the first film did have glitches where they used that to, cut to different scenes and whatever, or however it be, but this one was just overdid it, and maybe it was just because they had more modern cameras to film with, or they're like, oh, well, obviously the camera crew from the TV station wouldn't have as such a professional camera as the camera that the SWAT team would have, but it's it doesn't really work for me. And of course, they end up even using a camcorder halfway throughout the film, because the main camera dies, and then we cut to a camcorder from these teenagers who are outside, and then they end up getting inside through a basement, through the sewers, which they had it elaborated, they had it mentioned in the first film, but in the first film they thought they needed a key to get out through that cellar, but of course they didn't. It was unlocked the whole time. So, additionally, another thing that wasn't so great are the characters this time around. The SWAT team aren't interesting. The priest is probably the best character, but even then he's not that interesting, The film feels like a bigger budget went into the wrong places, and by that I mean it went into straight away being, okay, we're going straight into this film, and it's straight into a zombie apocalypse, more or less, in the building, There's no, let's get a feel for the characters, understand who they are, get to know them and care about them. It's nothing like that. Also, the film feels very predictable, in terms of its narrative and pacing sense. When they get into the building, you expect there to be zombies, but nope, there's no zombies. They climb all the way to the penthouse, still no zombies. And then they do something different, at least. The zombies that they do appear, they do get to first. They obviously realize something more possessed to some degree, which it's okay, that's interesting, and it's just possessed kids, more or less, and you're like, how are there more fucking kids in this building? And then you find out more about the science about it, and how the scientist, the priest dude, whoever the fuck it was that was actually experimenting on this girl to try and find a cure, and ended up like apparently kidnapping a bunch of kids and bringing them up to the place and experimenting on them, which seems a bit fucked up. It was for the obvious scares of, oh, these kids who can also climb on the roof and shit. It's like, I'm sorry, what now? Yeah, but the rest of the film, suddenly it's like, again, like I said, this can be immediately said, and all I was thinking by this stage was, I wonder when the zombies are going to appear, and then we're going to get our obligatory jump scares. The demon stuff wasn't as expected, which was nice, but that entangles more with the explanations of the origins aspect over what was obviously going to happen, given that the film takes place in the same location as the first film. Overall, not disappointing, but nothing special, especially in contrast to its superior predecessor. In terms of plot, again, they really emphasize the demonic nature of it all, and once you go through all the bullshit of, oh, here are the zombies, and then, oh, some of them get infected, they realize, the medical officer that's with them is actually a priest, and he can actually control the zombies, but he can, because he uses a crucifix, and whatever, and they obviously are some kind of extension of this demon that actually possessed the original girl, and that they need to get her blood in order to eradicate the virus, more or less. And so when they even find her blood, they even put a crucifix on it and it burns, but then the blood in the vial explodes. So they have to find they either have to find a secondary vial, or they have to find the actual girl. So they, then the kids come in, and one of the husband from the first film, who you only heard about, he was the father of the little girl who is infected, and with the dog, because he actually went to get the medicine, and he comes back and the whole place is in lockdown and whatever, and we only hear about him through a phone call, and then that's it. So of course you expect he's going to appear in the second film. And again, doesn't get any character development or anything. You see him and a firefighter go into the building, and these bunch of kids that you found through the camcorder are following them, and they get into the building. They want to be like, oh, we can film this and make some money off of it. And their characters are mostly pointless, because it just feels like an addition to the runtime. The kids add nothing to it. They only lead by accident, kind of, the main characters, the SWAT team, to a particular room where they're able to, where they end up finding, because the young kid gets possessed. He gets bitten by one of the soldiers, and obviously ends up becoming possessed. And they lock the other two kids into a bathroom or a bedroom, whatever it really was. And that's when our main character from the first film appears. She's perfectly fine. They talk to her and they're like, oh, you were the girl that was a news reporter that went in here and whatever. And she's like, yeah, that was me and whatever. So she's carrying the camera from the first film, and she's like, this camera still works. The guy ends up fixing it, so aka the camera guy from the first film, who is the actor of the camera guy from the second film, fixes it. And they get all back up and running, and she's just kind of there. She doesn't really add anything outside of, here's a third camera to film with. And, then the demon kid possessed explains how, you can, you're always about the light, but, you need to lose the light and whatever. And the priest asks, it's like, wait, how did you, see the first possessed girl? And it's like, oh, it's because it was dark. So he's like, oh, well, we must go in the dark then, How did you do it last time? Well, the camera has night vision. Oh, well, we'll use that. So they leave the possessed kid there. They leave the other two kids in the bedroom, and then we never come back to them. They are not important to the rest of the plot, so we never see them again. And it just makes me wonder, why couldn't this have just been the SWAT guy that we originally saw? By the way, the firefighter, the girl, because there's the three kids, there's a brother and sister and another guy who's mostly the cameraman, and the guy and the sister end up getting locked in the bathroom. The brother is the one who gets possessed, but the girl ends up shooting the firefighter because he's getting attacked by the zombie SWAT dude, and she doesn't know how to shoot the gun. She ends up shooting and killing the firefighter, and then she ends up killing the zombie. But yeah, so they get locked in the bathroom or bedroom, whatever. Then the SWAT team goes back upstairs. There's only like 2 SWAT guys left, or is there just 1 now? I think there's 2. I can't remember. One shoots themselves, the other one is the one that we saw. I think I think it's just the priest and the girl and the SWAT cameraman now. And so, oh no, there is a 3rd guy, right? There is another guy with them. And so they go back upstairs and they're like, well, we've already been to these extended hallways and stuff that they introduced in this film. And it's like, well, where's the girl, And it's like, we'll turn the lights off and put on the night vision. And they see that there's actually a secret door that wasn't there when you see it in the light, which is a nice use of surrealism in its own way. Like, that was nicely, comes into the film. They go in there, find a whole different room, investigate it, can't find anything, and they find another room attached to it. There's nothing there. They turn off all the lights, the guys, the camera, night vision, they find a well. Well, it's kind of like a bath. And they go to the bath in the dark. One of the guys, the other SWAT guy, puts his hand in it and gets dragged in. And then, they turn the lights, nothing's there, and they turn them back off, and then suddenly the big, tall, possessed girl is there. They have a fight. The main character, woman from the first film, ends up shooting it, because obviously the priest wants to get a blood sample. The woman shoots it and blows its head off, and he's like, why would you do that? We need to get out of here, but I need the blood sample to finish my mission and whatever. And it's like, all I'm thinking is like, but she shot its head off, there's still blood coming out of it, you could just use the blood. The creature doesn't have to be alive. And so, and again, they nicely use the creature again. It's subtle, and it's there, and it's really creepy. And then they get into a different room, and the cameraman and the girl are like, we need a security code because the priest has to use his voice command to let them out. And so she ends up shooting the cameraman, and the camera falls to the ground. And then, the priest realizes that the whole time she was actually possessed, but she was alive. And this is like unexplained, but this is more or less just a twist. She was the villain the whole time, kind of, at least since the end of the first film. And so she's like, I don't actually need you anymore, I just need your voice, because as if she just tastes his blood or something, and suddenly she has his voice, and uses his voice to, call on the radio and say, we need evacuation for 1 woman. It's like, oh, well, how could the woman have survived? It's like, she survived, but I'm infected, so burn the building down, whatever, as procedure. And then she looks at the camera, and then we flick to the final scene of the first film where she gets dragged away. And then the scene keeps going, where she gets back to the camera, and the demonic creature puts a kind of slug creature into her, from a mouth-to-mouth transmission, and that's where the film ends. So, yeah, pretty much the demon thing wins, and it's now going to be let out. So we'll see how this continues in the next part of the video, which is talking about Genesis. So they're still going on that biblical stuff. And then, of course, we finish with Apocalypse. So hopefully I'll have better lighting next time. So I just watched Rec 3 Genesis. It was interesting to some degree. Not overly spectacular, probably not what anyone would really want for a sequel. Kind of gotta crouch down. Rec 3, which is more or less like Rec cubed,
Genesis is directed by Paco Plaza, who I believe he co-directed the previous two films. This is an 80-minute film from 2012 with no one from the previous film. No one from the previous film, plural. So, straight off, I gave this film 2 stars. My quote is actually a two-header because it's stupid. One guy says, "And what exactly are you dressed as?" And the other guy says, "As Sponge John." It's meant to be this thing that happens twice, meant to be kind of like a gag. SpongeBob level gag, you know, because the guy's dressed kind of like SpongeBob. That's better, that works. But of course, it's far less interesting. So what did I write for my review? It's a pet peeve of mine when a film utilises an aspect ratio for over 15 minutes, in this case for 22 minutes, and then completely changes form and aspect ratio for the rest of the runtime. Did I mention that those first 22 minutes are handheld crap and is at an aspect ratio that's 2 times smaller than my TV screen, which is the standard 16:9, so it's just like a mini screen inside the bigger screen. Like, I don't care much for black bars, I don't, you know, aspect ratio is aspect ratio, but this was just messy and unnecessary. And I thought it was like a glitch on the DVD, because, you know, it's a DVD, it's not as good quality and all that kind of stuff. And it turns out, no, it was just doing that for the gimmick to, you know, be like the previous two films where it's all handheld stuff. And unfortunately, it's after the 22-minute mark when the zombies start coming in, because it's all during a wedding. It changes into a cinematic thing where now the camera is now omniscient, and you know, films like normal. It's still in the, you know, Cinescope. What do they say it as? The widescreen presentation, so it's not full screen. It's not 16:9. It's 2.35:1 or whatever. Outside of that, which was my pet peeve of the film, the film is pretty meh. It's fun to some degree, but, you know, in its final act, but not very compelling or tense. More or less just a complete letdown compared to the rest of the series. At least for the previous 2 installments, the characters are more or less worthless. There's nothing really entertaining or interesting about them. You care enough about the main 2 characters and their romance because it's literally them having their weddings. You have this believability aspect to it, but, like, there are no other characters who have any development, and literally the only one scene where one character does is, like, she's a French girl who was there, and, like, you know, she runs into the bride and a priest, and she's actually been just, you know, slept with a guy. They had no idea that the zombie apocalypse was happening, whatever the fuck. And so she, outside of the bride, once mentioning, like, in a few minutes after that, say, like, "Oh, you know what they say about French women, they're all sluts." And it's like, okay, why are you saying this to her face? And then later in the film, they're in, like, a garage, and she's saying, you know, the French girl is saying how, like, you know, she wasn't actually going to come. She felt it was weird that the bride had invited her, given that they'd hardly seen each other in so many years. And the bride literally said, "I wasn't actually going to invite you, I just wanted to invite you so I didn't seem like a bad person, you know, so we didn't have this beef, like, oh, you didn't invite me to your wedding," and whatever. And so, literally 2 seconds later, the French girl gets killed, so it's a completely useless scene, which this film is kind of filled with. There was even a part where I believe the director probably hadn't realised that there's this whole band of characters that we'd had to begin with, including one of the first cameramen, and they all disappear because the main character, the husband, goes to find his wife, because it's pretty much him. The husband tries to find the wife, and the wife tries to find the husband throughout the whole rest of the film, post the outbreak and whatever, and the husband ends up seeing them on a CCTV feed running into a bus, and all these zombies chasing them, and then as the doors are closing, the zombie gets in, and then, of course, the zombies end up breaking into the bus and killing all the people inside. So, yeah, that's literally how they wrote off all those extra characters that they had introduced. Yeah, this film has a lot of things with setup and stuff. It still tries to prolong the idea of the theme of religion and stuff, and this one definitely emphasizes it to the fact that, firstly, it's set there. They film it in a, they have a church wedding, so probably Catholic or Christian wedding, whatever Orthodox thing. It seems like a pretty standard wedding, and that's all filmed with the camcorder and whatever. Even though the camcorder is like half the time like looking at women's tits and stuff. So like the guy who's obviously like a teenager or whatever who's filming it is yeah, it's not great. So I guess thank God he dies for his terrible camcorder work. They actually jump through a couple of different cameras. They have an actual professional one, which is the last one we see before it breaks, and then the film like, oh, now we're actually going to full cinematic scope and whatever because we don't need this formula anymore. It's just it's not good, and they really emphasize that because all the rest of the camera work with those cameras is terrible. They hardly ever use the professional camera that's actually there, which even has a professional cameraman and an actual like Steadicam setup and everything. That would have been really cool, but no, of course they didn't do that. And so, the characters, I think, when the husband's confronting the cameraman, he's like, "Why are you filming?" He's like, "Oh, the people need to know." It's like, but what people? Who's gonna see this video? At least when it was like the first two films, you know, the first one was the camera crew, in this building. They didn't know if anyone else was infected outside the building, so it seemed very quarantined and isolated. So, we got to film it so the people know what's going on. And then they end up using the camera in the latter half of the film for the night vision, so it actually helps them. And the next film, pretty much the same kind of idea. They got to film it to document it, and then they use the night vision in the end and whatever. So, yeah. What's notable about the narrative? Not much. The first 20 minutes is the wedding, and then the after party, and then the zombies start invading. You see that one of the uncles is sick, and he's obviously, he was obviously one of the vets at where that dog that first had the infection that they mentioned in the first two films, and he got bitten, but then he went to this wedding, and he's the first to turn, but like he doesn't seem to infect anyone else, and then when he does, it's because he falls off a balcony and everyone sees, and they turn off the music, and then he ends up biting one of the women there, and then throwing up blood on other people, and then other zombies start jumping through the windows and stuff, and it's like, wait, where'd the other zombies come from? So, and you could already see that like the GU or whatever, those protected people were like already showing up outside because they obviously knew, okay, this guy here might have the virus. Like it's been reported that like he was bitten, because they probably have that, the veterinarians probably had that on record saying like, oh yeah, he got bitten, but he seemed to be fine and whatever. So it's like, okay, we gotta, because this is taking place the same day as the first film, we gotta, prevent that from going anywhere, and they just don't even go in and save everyone. They just wait for it to go to shit, and everyone dies. Except for, like, the priest who, after the main two characters finally meet, and this is, like, after the bride has torn off half her dress, and she's got a chainsaw, and she's, like, has this really badass moment, and she leaves the chainsaw behind, climbs up a ladder into, after this really tense scene of the zombies are gonna climb up the ladder following her, and the husband's trying to unscrew the drain, and he unscrews it, and she gets up, and they hug, and they kiss, but they don't close the vent or anything. But the zombies never come out of it, so I guess it's not important. Because the zombies end up breaking through the big vent and the door, and then they think they're about to die, and then you hear over the PA, the priest starts talking and saying prayers, because the last time we saw him, he started saying a prayer and all the zombies around him stopped and they didn't attack him. The last time we saw the people who went to the bus, they were inside a church and the zombies weren't coming into the church, and they realized, oh, these zombies obviously don't like religious stuff, but of course I guess because they had to kill those characters off, they just made them go to a bus. So that wasn't very smart. And I think that's something worth really noting. This film doesn't have very good characters, doesn't have any development, doesn't have any character arcs. It's just, oh, these characters that you just saw get married are now going to have to find each other and fight through zombies. One using a chainsaw, the other one dressing up as, Sir George. So he dresses up with all this medieval gear and a club, like a stick with a spiky ball, which he uses once. And then he throws away his shield and his helmet, but he keeps the chest plate. And I'm like, but that shit literally protects you. But I guess probably because he saw the previous guy who wore the armor with him just got taken from behind, and you never saw anything happen to that guy outside of the shield came running out, and the guy's like, okay, the husband's like, I gotta get out of here. And so then the characters, because the priest is obviously doing the talk of the PA, so all the zombies everywhere are frozen in place pretty much. And so, he can obviously see the husband and wife on the camera feed. So as they're getting out, one zombie comes in and attacks the bride and bites her, and so they end up chopping off her arm with a sword, because they mentioned earlier that there's an old guy who has a hearing aid, can't hear anything, so obviously as a zombie he can't hear the priest talking. And so they get to the end of the quarantine area, and she starts to turn to a zombie, so the husband picks her up, like, you know, like a wedding thing or whatever, like, oh, this is your new home kind of thing, whatever the fuck. They walk out of the tunnel, and then he's told to put her down because she's obviously infected. He ends up kissing her, she turns, bites off out his tongue, and then he starts turning, but not really, because he's still pretty conscious. They shoot the crap out of the couple, and the last shot is him, the husband, reaching out and grabbing her hand, and then they die. And then the credits come up, and it's like, okay. The only other interesting thing of note is whenever you see in a reflection a zombie, it's actually the old woman from the first ever demon zombie from the first and second film, which was interesting. So obviously, like, in the reflection, it's just a newer version. It's another version of her, pretty much, an extension of her. Even though I'm pretty sure that's not what the demon would actually look like, but it's at least it was an interesting idea, something that connected them outside of the fact that they didn't like religion. But yeah, this film was not great. It wasn't boring. It was quick and easy to watch, so that's at least a convenient part. Wasn't as good as the previous two, but even the previous one, the Rec 2, wasn't that great anyway, so I'd definitely say this one's the worst of the trilogy. We'll see how the fourth one goes, though, in a new location where I guess can't be criticised for being in a linen cupboard and filming. Cool. See you in a bit. What the fuck? Oh, okay. It's weird. I think my camera was malfunctioned. That's weird. Cool. Apocalypse. We're talking about the last one now. This is Rec 4 Apocalypse. This is a 2014 film directed by, I believe, the same two directors of the first two films. The co-director who left the third one came back for the final one because they'd already picked, like, the company that made them had already picked it up for the last two films, for the third and fourth one. So, yeah. So you can I feel like you can kind of tell which one's good at directing horror. But at the same time, I think they both wrote all of the films anyway, so yeah, it's hard. I'm not really going to pin this on directors as to why they became bad in quality, given it's the same guys for the whole 4 films. So I gave this film 2.5 stars. I was thinking of 3 stars. It's arguably a 3-star film, but it's just, especially in terms of it looking at it as a film in a franchise, it just makes me lessen it a bit just because of what it adds to the franchise. Otherwise, it's probably a decent 3-star film of just generic zombie action film. Or more or less, generic action film with zombies as the villains. So, yeah. My quote, I've got a bad feeling about this, because it's the only one I can remember, because I'm like, oh, they're pulling cliche dialogue. Like, the captain of the ship is like, this is probably my last voyage, I think I'll retire after this, that'd be nice, and he keeps mentioning the fact that he's probably going to retire. And to be honest, I blinked and missed the part where he died. like literally they had this whole scene where one of they pinned down one of the characters trying to dissect her, and then another zombie breaks in, and then he kills one dude, and then they kill the zombie, and then they kill the other dude. But I don't know what the hell happened to the captain throughout the whole period, so I think he just kind of maybe died off screen. I don't know. I obviously must have blinked and missed it. So, yeah, I don't really care. My review, holy boy. Predictable, incoherently edited, thanks to its many action scenes, and rarely scary, this conclusion, though not terrible, is at least trying to be its former self. Given the intensity of the original, and the try-hard sequel and the bland threequel, I'm at least surprised that this film was still entertaining, and to be fair, they've all been entertaining, just to varying degrees of entertaining. Like, the third film was only entertaining after they fucked off the camcorder stuff, and then the rest of the film was like, okay, now it's kind of getting interesting, but that's because there's actually an apocalypse happening. You kind of know a few of the characters, but not really. You're just pretty much like, well, I'm along for the ride now. Might as well just keep watching it. This film strives to have more fleshed out characters in contrast to the wedding film, which was nice, of course, and it brings back the first film's protagonist. That's right, the news reporter is back. She's still alive, of course, because of course you'd be wondering at the end of the second one, how did she escape? And of course, this fourth one starts off with, well, they got a SWAT team to go up there, and which is weird enough because they go up there to set bombs and everything, but like they don't even mention her until they hear her screaming from up the top, one of the top floors, saying, "Hey, I'm up here. Help me out." And then the one guy's like, "All right, I'll go up," because the other two guys have died, and there's one guy left who's like, "All right, I'm gonna go down the other way," and yeah, so that was weird, especially given how they ended the second film saying, you can come into the building and destroy it now, there's only one woman left and she's coming down now, I'm about to die. So yeah, that was weird. I think they may have needed it for the particular twist that they have in the film, but at the same time, they really could have still pulled it off anyway. They could have been like, okay, we're going to set up this self-destruct thing, I'm going to go up and find that woman, you guys set up all the bombs and kill whatever things come at you, don't get bitten. So yeah, but of course that didn't happen. But yes, this film ultimately brings nothing new to the table, even with it being the final film in the narrative. The creators of the 4 films have said that they're not going to make any more, which is interesting, I guess, notably because of the ending, but I think we might touch on that. Personally, though the second and this film are watchable, I mean, I'd suggest avoiding the third film, even though it's only 80 minutes long. You don't really need to watch it, and even its only time to this film is just one of the characters is from the wedding, and she's like the grandma of the male of the husband, the groom character, but that's only just to reference the fact that they quarantined that area and got the people out of safety. But it's like, why would you get a random old woman when you could have gotten the priest? Because it's like the priest we know was a character who survived. Why didn't they just get the priest? Otherwise, I would definitely suggest watching the third film, because otherwise they'll just confuse the hell out of you. Why didn't they just bring back the priest? This old woman we never saw, we've assumed that everybody there was bitten or, died somehow, except for the priest, given how he was the one, using the speakers to say the prayer and whatever. So it's like, he obviously knows that saying a prayer, and all that shit, reading verses from the Bible, obviously tells the demons to go fuck themselves, pretty much. And they just were like, okay, we'll just stand here and wait till you fuck off, and then we'll go crazy again. So it's like, wouldn't it be the best idea to have brought him back into it? Because then at least you could have still had the religious thing. So whenever most of the action scenes were happening with the zombies chasing the people, it wouldn't be, well, this guy's either going to die, or they're going to get in the struggle and then kick the zombie off them and then kill the zombie. Because that's only 2 types of action scenes in this whole entire fucking movie, or except for the monkeys. That's a whole different story. There are monkey zombies in this film, which seems very random and unnecessary, and outside of the first kill, like the first guy who gets turned into a zombie, and even that's kind of useless. Except, well, it isn't, because he's the chef, so it kind of sets up how they all turn into zombies. What's one of the rest I say? I feel like the first film stands best on its own, definitely. I guess there's no harm in watching the sequels, but the first one is never bested, and I doubt it ever will be. So yeah, 2.5 stars. Narrative-wise, the main woman from the first and second film and two SWAT guys who went up to save her are put onto a boat, which is an interesting location for a zombie film, a big ship, like an oil tanker kind of ship and whatever. And so they have them plus, like I said, the old woman from the wedding who you never saw, and I'm kind of questioning what the hell's up with her hair because it looks like she's got a grey wig on top of brown hair, so I don't know if they used that to make her look older. That's just a weird thing. Maybe that's just the way that she dyed her hair back in 2014. I don't know. 2013 maybe, still. And so, you slowly figure out what's going on, and, you're thinking this whole time that our main female character still has that parasite in her, because, that's what we saw in the previous film, so you'd expect that she'd still have the parasite, but she has no memory of what happened. Then there's there's a lot of characters in this film. You've got the scientist department, which is at the very bottom. Actually, no, there's the base layer is the engine room with one black dude, which they, of course, have one guy be really racist to. That doesn't come back until the guy becomes a zombie, comes after him, and he kills him with a wrench. But it doesn't matter, black guy dies anyway, because movie. The next layer which is draining a lot of the power, hence causing a lot of blackouts and brownouts, is this big laboratory where they're trying to, process the blood to try and make a serum for it and whatever. Their patient zero is that the other guy the SWAT dude who went downstairs actually collected blood from one of the zombies, and so they injected it into one of the monkeys, and for some reason strapped the monkey down on a gurney, which is like a chair, which they'd put locked away. But then when they open the door to reveal their prisoner has escaped, and you think it's a dude who's run around zombie thing and whatever, but you're also thinking, but how does that make any sense? Because someone obviously went in there to fuck around or whatever. I guess the twist, I don't really think we'll get to that yet. It's revealed that it was actually a rabid monkey who has the zombie virus, who ends up getting into the kitchen, biting the chef, who cooks part of it. We don't know if he ends up serving it, but it definitely disappears. I think it just runs away and comes back later through one of the vents, which they end up shooting it, so it's kind of useless. He ends up probably cooking with a bloodied hand and whatever, and all of the lamb chops and whatever that he's making, the military end up eating it, and they end up all getting sick. Pretty much everyone who eats it gets sick and whatever, just like the co-captain of the ship. And that's when the main zombie outbreak happens. And then everyone gets split up and does all this and that and whatever. Notable things. Our main character, the woman, she gets trapped downstairs and ends up having to run away from a herd of those zombie monkeys. So apparently there was more than one, and they were all in these cages, which they ended up breaking out of anyway. So that's weird. I don't know why they wouldn't have all of them in the same room or just do one at a time. The serum that they use doesn't work on the chef, and they realize it's because it's a mutated strand, so they have to work from the original bloodline, from the woman, the possessed woman, but of course she's dead. But then they look at the footage, a cameraman, a dude who is meant to be working on the radios, but of course because they've blocked off all the signals, ends up getting the camera, preparing the footage. He's a big fan of the woman from the TV show. And so he fixes all the footage, he goes through it, he sends it to the people downstairs, the scientists. They look through it, realize that they see the clip from the end of the second film, which reveals obviously that there's a parasite that gets put into a healthier host, being the younger girl. They go to chop her up, again, the same with the captain like I mentioned, and then she's like, no, it's not me, I'll prove it to you. And then she ends up biting the main lab dude, the main guy in charge, and he tests his blood and realizes that he's healthy. So obviously that means that she's healthy. And so the end all be alls that we find out in the twist that of the two military guys, the one that went downstairs who, gave the blood, his whole character arc is to redeem himself. He doesn't exactly get paid off because he still ends up getting killed, but it's like he's trying to fix things. I think he goes down to the engine room to fix everything to get them all out of there because he's like, hey, I'm obviously the reason why this is all happening. It's my fault. We should, I want to, do my best. So I was thinking, okay, why is this guy in it? And that's why. Of the 4 people who survived, old lady, a reference to the previous film, and then becomes a zombie at one point and fights the guy who brought on the blood, brought the blood on the ship and whatever. So yeah, that's her necessity. His necessity is that with his actual character arc. He's the only one in this film with a character arc, more or less. Other people just kind of do things because they need to or want to. There's no real arcs to it. Our main girl, you think half the time, you think as an audience that she's evil and she's controlling it all, but in fact, no, she's not. Turns out when the military guy went upstairs, they ended up making out or something, and she passed the virus on to him because, of course, the parasite. And that's why she forgot, because she collapsed and didn't realize, had forgotten everything that had happened. So, of course, when she was watching the footage seeing it all happen, she was like, what the hell's going on? I've never seen this before, because she's forgotten what happened. Which kind of makes sense, but also doesn't. And it's, not really necessary, because it's what's the point of her forgetting outside of forgetting that she had the parasite? But it's just to confuse the audience in a way, to be like, oh, well, maybe it isn't her. And then she has a nightmare about it, so maybe it is her. It's like... But no, it's the guy that we've been following the whole time, the military guy, who I was thinking, what the fuck is the point of this guy? I get it, our main character is usually the boring one, but he's literally got nothing going for him outside of he's a doctor and a military dude. And then the twist is, of course, he has the parasite inside him. He pushes our girl into the pit, which of course leads her to the monkeys. And then he only appears one more time when he tries to give the parasite back to her, and she shoots him in the head with a harpoon gun. And the parasite just lingers outside of his mouth, crawls back into him, obviously realizes that it's, whatever. And then the last 2 characters left are the guy who fixed the tape, who's actually probably the best character, to be fair. He's the most entertaining character in the whole entire film, because he's just like, oh yeah, I just was able to casually hack into all this stuff because it's easy and whatever, he's just a fun character. And he, of course, also really likes the main character from the first film, so it's you can kind of relate to him. And so him and her run to the top. They get a propeller from a motorboat, which I didn't know what the fuck it was the whole entire film until I realized, oh, it's a propeller for a motorboat that they don't have because the only escape vehicle that they have is an inflatable boat. And they have to find that because, of course, all the lifeboats were taken off the boat and whatever, just in case someone gets the virus and they use the boat to get out of there, or the zombies use the boat to get out of there. The ship actually has a self-destruct, so, of course, if you've ever watched Aliens, this film is pretty much Aliens, except bad. Or at least poorly done. So then our last 2 characters inflate the thing whilst the zombies are chasing after them in the rain, because they're on a boat and it's raining, of course. She jumps out off the boat to get into the smaller one, but she lands in the water. He jumps with the propeller, somehow manages to get onto the boat with the propeller, and doesn't die. Neither does he drop the propeller. It's a big, heavy thing, which they use as a weapon a few times. They use it to kill the rest of the monkeys and to kill a few zombies. And then, he keeps calling for her, because obviously he doesn't want to leave without her, because she's meant to be in the water somewhere, and then she just pops up. She probably would have drowned realistically in the time it took them for that to actually show her there. And they get her onto the boat, and then they set up the propeller, try to get it to work. By this stage, I was expecting the zombies to have climbed the net that they got to the top layer, even though he cut one of the things off. None of the zombies jump after them. So it's just, I'm expecting it to happen, and nothing happens, and they finally get the propeller working, which theoretically they shouldn't have, because they would have used all of their petrol. But it's also where are they getting their fuel from? What? They don't have any fuel canisters with them, so they're probably going to die on the water. But of course, the main objective is escape from the shit that's about to explode, and then the ship, of course, explodes. The whole thing goes off, and phew, it's actually a pretty impressive effect because it goes from a distance, shows the whole thing exploding. And yeah, then you've got a post. Well, then you've got a scene of. You've got two final scenes. The final scene that they show is the parasite in the water, as if a big explosion doesn't kill it, which is concerning and also kind of dumb. But like, did the parasite crawl all the way out of there? Because they closed the door and shit, so I don't know how the hell that survived. And then it lands in the water. A fish touches it, but the fish is smaller, and it wiggles, and so the fish swims away. And the big barracuda comes and just eats it in one go. So of course, most likely, the parasite will, of course, infect the fish, and then all of the fish will become zombie fish, and then the world is screwed, probably. I can only assume that that's what they were going for in the end. It's hard to say. But that's their cliffhanger ending for that. That'll never be resolved, so left up to your interpretation, which I think is probably best. If not, you could probably read Uzumaki. I think it's Uzumaki. No, Gyo. Gyo, it's a manga by Junji Ito about robot death fish. It's really good. I'd suggest it. So, yeah. And then in the middle of the credits, or at least a few seconds after the credits start, you get a scene of in a taxi car, in a cab, in a taxi, whatever. This guy's listening to the radio in the back seat. Are our main two characters that survived. Obviously, they got made back to shore. And he and the guy in the cab, he looks up through the reflection of them, and he's like, wow, it must have been a really wild party last night. And they just look at each other and look back at him and just kind of go like, yeah. But like, they don't say anything, but it's just like, oh, yeah, Jesus Christ. You know, they have that look in their faces like you have no idea. And then it ends. So, yeah, our heroes survive. The zombie outbreak is contained. And, yeah. I can note that the directors said that they weren't going to go with this big, all of, apocalyptic nature of, zombies running wild on the streets of Barcelona, because the budget for all the films was the same. So they didn't have the budget for it. So, of course, they didn't want to go overboard. And it's fair enough. I kind of like how the simplicity of it. The only overboard nature they go in is in terms of filmmaking. Like, the first two are the camcorder first-person stuff, which works really well, especially in the first film. The third film drops that, which is the worst part of the film, and then they drop it after 20 minutes, and then do it all cinematic, and it's a bit too late to try something new, and it just becomes a waste of time for the whole film. And then the fourth film is purely cinematic, with having a few camera shots through like the CCTV on the ship, because they're like, oh, we set up cameras everywhere. I'm like thinking, why would you need to set up cameras everywhere outside of a block for the convenience of the script and whatever? So yeah, overall, it's an interesting franchise, an interesting quadrilogy. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. Wreck, wholeheartedly worth checking out. It is a masterpiece of horror, especially of modern horror. Yes, they're all Spanish, but hell, you fucking do watch Wreck. It is, or record. It is exceptional. I'm not surprised by the people who give it 5 out of 5 stars, saying it's the best modern horror film, or one of the best horror films in decades. Wreck 2 is a decent follow-up. It's necessary enough if you want to get more of the backstory and understand the narrative more and see what happens next. But you don't need to if you don't want to. The ending to the first one is perfect. If you really want to see it, a continuation, then yeah, sure, Wreck 2 is the perfect way to go. And skip Wreck 3, it's not necessary at all. Genesis kind of sucks. And if you want to, and someone even noticed this on the IMDb trivia, if you watch the first, second, and third without credits, it's just like a 2.5 to 3 hour long film, more or less. So, because it's all like, 75 minutes, 80 minutes, and 90 minutes. So it's like, yeah, it's about like a 4 hour marathon, pretty much, of one straight consecutive narrative. The first one goes into the second one, again, cut out the credits. Second one goes straight into the fourth one. So,
So it's a kind of a story in 3 acts, if you will. But yeah, it would be jarring to go straight from the second one right into the fourth one. But then the third one doesn't give you the proper adjustment period for the change of media anyway. You just kind of have to accept what you're getting to with the third film. It would kind of make sense as it's a third and final act, so of course it's got to be more cinematic and stuff, which works in its own right. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. This has been a Come and Relax talk on the Record quadrilogy. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more. Somewhere up here you'll find a playlist for my Come and Relax playlist, and maybe my previous Come and Relax playlist video, whether it be the Hammer horror films or the Halloween ones. I did 3 parts for the Halloween because there are so many films. I did the Alien ones, Fast and Furious, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Chucky, and Child's Play. So yeah, I've done a good amount of horror and action in this selection of videos and reviews. And that's all I gotta say. I will note again, like I did at the end of in one of my Halloween videos, I would have gone into more detail about behind the scenes stuff. I did note some stuff, I guess, but there's no special features on any of these DVDs except for the first film. And the first film definitely has some very interesting ones that go into the behind the scenes and production of and whatever. And it's ultimately definitely worth watching, even just the DVD version. The second film and the third film don't have anything outside of like trailers and TV spots, so yeah, that's unfortunate. Yep, that's it. Okay, bye.